Well, my gorilla's a little bit more than just a ordinary gorilla. He's a bad gorilla, and there's something inside him that might be a little bit human. So it's going to be a big surprise in the Omni. The Koloff, Nikita Ivan Koloff world titles against Dustin Rhodes, the American Dream, and a blooded American gorilla, brother. And there will be gorilla shit all over the Omni. I got that stuff.
This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com. The only place to be in your pop culture world.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before I was so rudely interrupted with a commercial break, I have no loyalty to the World Wrestling Federation. I've only got loyalty to good old JR.
Billionaire Ted, are you trying to put the World Wrestling Federation out of business?
I'm trying to make money.
How about this is where the big boys play?
Nobody in the building cares. Nobody in the dressing room cares. So much goddamn injustice around here. I've had it up to here.
Are you trying to put the World Wrestling Federation out of business?
You're damn right I am, and nobody's gonna stop me.
Grab your plunder and open the pay window. It's time for Survey Says.
I leave the National Football League for a toga. It's crap.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to WCW Survey Says. We are live, on tape, recorded, with Zero Strong here, because we are coming to you from the Center Stage Theater in Atlanta. That's right, this is a studio edition of Survey Says, where we're going to run through a conceptual exercise for us on our program tonight. We are guestless. It is only myself, Tim Capel, and my great co-captain, the one and only Andy Savage Helene.
I do see Klondike Bill over there kind of cleaning up the floor, the spillage.
Oh, you're right. We would be remiss in not mentioning Klondike Bill, who was with us in form and in spirit. I don't know if he's paying much attention to the proceedings, but he is present as well, like he always is. So. And
I think Hacksaw Jim Duggan just fished a title out of the trash can over there too.
Ho!
Tough guy.
So what are we doing here tonight? We are without a guest. We are live via studio, but this is not a recap show. We are not doing a bottle episode by any means. This is not a clip show. We are going to talk about something I think is pretty fun, pretty different from us, but in keeping with the spirit of WCW Survey Says. We are going to do a comparison and contrast of different personalities, different characters who had careers both in the WCW and the WWF. So I guess we should explain our criteria a little bit. So there's a cutoff for this. Many people who had long and storied careers in World Championship Wrestling later moved to the World Wrestling Federation or World Wrestling Entertainment, but if they did so after the closure, after the purchase of WCW, we're not really counting that. Is that right, Andy?
Yeah, because I think you brought up this idea of doing this show, which I'm really excited about this topic, but I think we had some initial discussion, like you had said maybe cutting it off at Survivor Series 2001, but then, and I think we were going to do that, but then it kind of made more sense just to end it with that last Nitro, boom, when WCW was kaput.
Yeah, there's that little bit of a transitional period, and it becomes somewhat arbitrary where you draw the line, because at a certain point, WCW is no longer a factor, and whatever a guy goes on to do in World Wrestling Entertainment, it's sort of irrelevant because there is no comparison you could make. It's not like they could be wrestling for WCW at the same time, since WCW no longer existed.
Then I kind of thought, well, WWF isn't actually going to put these guys too far over their own people, their own talent. So you can't really use that as criteria.
And that was the big shortcoming of the Invasion. Not to get into a whole let's rebook the Invasion thing, but at the end of the day, no one that came over from WCW during that storyline in 2001 really benefited or became better right out of the gate in the WWF/WWE. So we're just trying to do an all things being equal type of comparison here. So just apples to apples when both promotions existed at the same time. So I think that makes sense, right?
Yeah, and I really love that you brought up this idea because it's one that I really had to put my thinking cap on, because the other shows we do, we just watch a pay-per-view and then we kind of talk about it. Whereas this one, it's like I had to sit down and really think about what I want to say about this person. And
yeah, more of a thought experiment than we often do. And this is just not wanting to box ourselves into any one particular concept or theme with this show, Survey Says. So I think with our criteria made clear, we still have a lot of options here that we can evaluate and survey. A lot of different talent to run through, and this could make for several shows. We're not going to necessarily have the definitive statement on everybody that worked for both promotions just within this one episode. We're going to go through whatever guys we go through here, and if we have some left standing, as I'm sure we will, we might do a follow-up at a later date. So fair enough for you, Andy?
Oh, yeah, sure, because there was like one or two where I came up with a list, like a big list, a couple pages long, and then there was like one or two where I actually kind of left them off.
Yeah, me too, because I was like, needs a second look, Maybe I'm just not informed enough. So,
or one like Public Enemy, actually, I'll just throw it out now, Public Enemy. I think they showed up in 99, like, in the build-up to WrestleMania 15, and I think they were jobbed out worse than some of the guys in the Invasion. It's like WWF signed them, and then I think they kind of had a second thought, like, oh shit, why'd we sign these guys? And so they got like completely like jobbed out and squashed, and then they were never heard from again. I think it was like a 2-week thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. They did not pass the APA or the then Acolytes test, where Bradshaw and Farouk were sort of the gatekeepers of the tag division in the WWF, and any new guys brought in, they would have to sort of go through this baptism of fire.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. I remembered Public Enemy, but I forgot it was the APA or the Acolytes back then.
They got killed by the Acolytes. So that was one of those the life imitating art sort of deals. And then, they were done. You're right, after about 2 weeks.
Oh, and then this also kind of jogged my memory. Even around that same period, I didn't think of this guy on my list, but Dr. Death, like Steve Williams. He showed up then with JR, and I think he might have been in that Brawl for All, but I don't know if you can actually compare that to WCW, because he was actually given a substantial role in WCW, whereas this, he just made a few appearances. So I don't know if you can really like weight that.
Right. They seem like they wanted to make something of him, but just never quite got off the ground. And he did have a pretty accomplished career in WCW earlier in the 90s, and even later on when he went back to WCW. So
he actually had a WWF action figure, I remember, at that time, and I actually got it.
Did he really?
I don't really remember him even wrestling.
Yeah, I definitely can picture it. Him and Jim Ross, like, didn't they like show up and wreak havoc on a frat party or something?
The only thing I remember is Jim Ross. It was when he came back after his Bell's palsy, and he had his own fake announce table in front of the real announce table. And I think Dr. Death just kind of stood there like his bodyguard with his arms crossed. And JR, it was pretty funny. I actually kind of want to go back and rewatch that now just to see if if I'm making it more funny than it was.
I think it was unintentionally funny. You're right, but it's very funny to me as well. It just probably wasn't supposed to play that way. He was JR's boy, and JR was totally his hype man when he came back, and it was supposed to amount to a lot. In fact, I think they had him, or JR at least had him pegged as a challenger for Stone Cold, and again, sort of that spring-summer period of 1999, and it just wasn't going to happen. So let's get to sort of the meat of our discussion. Do you have somebody at the top of your list, or who do you want to start with in our analysis here?
You just want to go down my list?
Let's do it, yeah.
At the top of my list, it wasn't really in any order, actually. It was just whoever came to my head, and I wrote them down. I had Roddy Piper.
Yep. Totally on my list as well. So
we already set the end date, so let's start the beginning point. I went with Hulkamania, him getting the title in the mid-'80s.
I do think with Piper, you have to count the first Starrcade at least.
Oh, okay.
For, not that WCW exists. So that's another good consideration, is not only the cutoff, but what's our starting point, because WCW has this huge NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions lineage. Yeah. So where do you really start? And
if we're going to do that, he wrestled Greg Valentine at that Starrcade. So obviously Greg Valentine was a Crockett guy, and then...
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of, some of those guys are a little bit tricky, but I do at least feel like that first Starrcade is fair game if the guys were on that show.
Okay. Right? Well, then I guess we could go with that, but I don't think it'll change my answer. I'm still going to go...
it may not. Mm-hmm.
I had Roddy Piper at the top of my list, and I have the WWF being where he was booked better.
Yeah, I can't really knock it. I think that's where, in the prime of his career, he also did the best work of his career, the most iconic stuff, with being the villain to Hulk Hogan. So you need not just the baby faces to make Hulkamania work. You also need a great heel, a great antagonist, and that's what Roddy Piper was. So in terms of his booking, in terms of the draw that he was, maybe not even so much the matches, but you can't even really sleep on the matches from that early WWF run. I can't really knock it. If you try to make the case for WCW, NWA, I mean, yeah, you've got the good Valentine stuff at Starrcade. That dog collar match is really good as a match, but not a lot else of note until his return to WCW in '96. And while I like that stuff a lot, I think it was a situation where they're doing the best they can with this character, with this personality, that they could, given his limitations. Because he couldn't really work so much at that point. The one hip promo, right, where we don't have one hip wrestlers. Well, I'm a one hip wrestler.
I didn't want to get too silly with this and say, well, like WCW booked him better because of the whole Alcatraz thing, just because that's like a guilty pleasure.
It is. It's a guilty pleasure of ours, and I think it's them making the best they could out of what they had again. So while I like that stuff, it was still not prime Roddy Piper. And I mean, and that's not even considering the stuff that he did in his WWF comeback, where he had the Gold Dust feud, right? Just before that in '96, which isn't great, but it's still fun.
Which, even rewinding back before that, he showed up in '94, and that's around when I started watching wrestling, and he wrestled Jerry Lawler. But he did these things like Bottom Line, where he would have little segments where I think he must have been on his trailer on a movie set.
Hey, King, I heard you say you saw Helen Hart at the zoo. Were you a spectator, or were you just being fed? Bottom line.
Don't you understand why folks avoid me? You know why? 'Cause I don't take no dives. And I don't do windows. I don't retreat. And I don't surrender. You've crossed the bottom line. Welcome to my world.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. You know, everybody thinks of Piper's Pit as his interview segment. Again, point goes to WWF. But yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about that. So thank you. Yeah, I can't really make a good argument for anything other than the World Wrestling Federation for Roddy Piper as the better version of the guy. So, all right, who else have we got?
Next up, I have Randy Savage, and I also I went in the direction of the World Wrestling Federation.
Yeah, and this one's a little bit easier, I think, to make the comparison. It's not like he floated between both promotions with as much regularity as other guys. You know, it's just he has his WWF run, and then he has his WCW run. And they aren't very flattering comparisons, I don't think. WWF, you have the great matches, the great work rate, the huge angle of the Mega Powers, of course. That alone, I feel like would put him over the top, but he was also the guy that was regarded as Mr. WrestleMania before Shawn Michaels was regarded as Mr. WrestleMania, and there's a lot to be said for that. And what do you have to compare that to, right, in WCW?
You have the feud with Flair. I kind of like that stuff, and then the DDP feud, so it's like half as long as his WWF tenure, but there's still some good stuff. You can kind of ignore the 99 comeback, but I still think 95, 96, 97, he had some good years. He wasn't just half-assing it in WCW. He still had a lot in the tank.
I would agree, he did. And so let's not feed into the narrative of, oh, he just went to the WCW and he started dogging it at that point. That's like when he sucked. That's not true at all. The DDP feud is a tremendous highlight. Some of my best work, one of my favorite feuds of all time, that's in 1997. Even before that, as you mentioned, the Flair stuff. I mean, he seemed to be feuding with Flair on and off for a good 2 years. And I thought all of their material was pretty strong. So does it hold up to his WWF work? Not really, but it's not such a tremendous drop-off as maybe people might lead you to think. So it's, once again, I give the edge WWF, but it's not a huge disparity.
It also makes you kind of like, or at least for me, it almost makes me kind of sad because he could have been doing that in the WWF in their, like, I guess, sure, they were branding it as the new generation. So he could have been a guy in the role that in the last couple of years, like Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho have kind of worked with the younger guys and put them over. He could have been doing that.
Mm-hmm. He could have been even better. You're right. They did not maximize on the potential that they had while he was around. That's
I kind of think he's fun on those Raws with Vince McMahon, like where he's commentating.
Yep.
But yeah, they could have had him against
wrestling, right?
Yeah, they could have put him against Jeff Jarrett or something. Put Jarrett over, or Diesel. They could have Savage put over Diesel.
Or my God, Undertaker or Brett. How crazy is it that we don't see our first proper Randy Savage Bret Hart match until 1998 in WCW? So, which almost feels like too little, too late. They could have been doing that much earlier. So you almost want to dock them some points for not using him to his maximum potential.
Yeah.
All right, so I think with a little bit of an asterisk, again, we still go WWF for Savage. Who else you got on your? I've certainly got my list as well, and there's been overlap, of course, with both these guys. But who do you have next?
But we've still been on the same page, right? WWF.
We have, yes, no disagreement so far.
I don't think we're going to disagree with this one either, but I seem to have kept going R's for the first couple names. And my next guy is Ricky Steamboat, and I went WCW with that. Even though he does have like the iconic Savage feud in the WWF, but then he's got the Flair feud. It was almost like I kind of just compared those. Do I like the Flair feud or the Savage feud?
Yeah, so it's like, what's his peak in WWF? It's the Savage feud, clearly, with admittedly one of the best matches ever, but you have to compare that to what's his peak in WCW, again, / NWA, the Flair feud, which is 3 of the best matches ever in the same year. So comparing him to his own body of work in both promotions, give the edge to WCW / NWA. He's one of those guys who floated between both companies a little bit, but his best work always just seemed to be in WCW. Of course, you have the feud with Rick Rude in the early 90s in 92.
Or the Steve Austin stuff over the U.S. title in 94.
The Steve Austin stuff, yep. And that, of course, is where his regular active in-ring career ends. But still, it was always just, he was like the cream of the crop in WCW, and he always rose to the top. So that's an much easier call for me to make. I mean, what else do you really have to go on in WWF? They did the thing where he was the Dragon, right? And they didn't want to acknowledge that he was Ricky Steamboat. Remember that?
Yeah. He also had earlier in the 80s Jake the Snake, I think.
Right.
He gave him a DDT on the floor, and then they had like a Saturday night's main event match.
That was a hot angle. Not great matches, but pretty hot angle. He's throwing the Dragon at Jake Roberts as Jake throws the python at him, which always cracks me up. It's one of those, you couldn't get away with it today, but watching it now is just so ridiculous and so funny. But it's a pretty isolated storyline in an otherwise pretty jam-packed career that mostly had its highlights in what is nearest and dearest to our heart, WCW. So that's an easier one for me too. Who else we got? We're progressing quite well through this, I feel like.
Next on my list is one that, with the area that we've given for this period, there's not really a fair comparison because one promotion had him for a short time, one had him for a very lengthy time, and it's Ric Flair. So he only had 1 year in the WWF, even though that year was awesome, and I was most familiar with that with watching VHS tapes and stuff, and it's like there's no comparison.
Yeah, you're right. This is an issue of longevity where Vince only had him for 1 year. Granted, it was a very, very good year of Ric Flair's career. Had he stuck around longer, I think you could make more of a case because pound for pound, it is one of the best years of Flair's entire career.
Yeah.
Because of the reasons that you mentioned. But, I mean, obviously, advantage goes WCW. There's just so much more of a body of work. Granted, a lot of it is not very good, but so much of it is of a very, very high quality. The best work of his career largely took place in WCW. So that's an easy one. I mean, and what's the criticism when it comes to his WWF run, right? Where even though he's having good matches, he becomes more of a sort of one-dimensional, almost not quite as cartoonish as their other gimmicky sort of characters of the Federation era, but similar to that, where that's what he has to match, that's what he has to fit in with, and it doesn't feel totally like the same Ric Flair.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was you texting me this or if it was like a blog conversation years ago, but somebody had said and made up a good point that he seems more like a cartoon version of Ric Flair because he's not the limousine riding, jet flying. He's just wearing Cosby sweaters and stuff.
Yes. You don't see him in the suit like you do in
or he's always in the robe. He's always in the robe. Like he's never in the fancy suits all the time.
Yeah, you don't see the aviator sunglasses and the shoes that cost more than your house and just that kind of swagger to Ric Flair. I think that his overall personality was enough to overcome some of those shortcomings in the booking of his character in the WWF. But at the same time, they are forcing him into that sort of role. And it's part of why I think he didn't stick around as long as maybe he could have. I guess we're about 2 for 2 here with we've got Flair and Steamboat. WCW did much better, and Piper. Who else have we considered here? So
Randy Savage and Piper. And actually, looking at that, if you think WWF, like you do think Piper and you do think Savage. When you think WCW, you do think Steamboat and you do think Flair.
Not tremendously surprising here, but worth the discussion. Who's our next entrant here?
Oh, well, I was going to say that, like, I didn't plan this, but I was going to say that I liked the Flair partnership with Mr. Perfect, which leads us into our next guy. I had Curt Hennig, because maybe that was my thought process when just writing these down, because I was just doing it at work on, like, a lunch break. I was just coming up with as many guys as I could, and then I went through the next day and kind of plugged in the different promotions. This is the toughest one that I went back and forth.
Really?
So much on this. I had to give the nod to WCW, actually.
Really?
Which totally surprises me because he is so iconic, the Mr. Perfect. That character, I love that. He was like the first heel that I ever liked. I didn't know heel was a term, but he was just a bad guy that captivated me. But the reason why I went with WCW is because that turn, when he turned on the Horseman, like maybe now it seems kind of telegraphed, but at the time, that turn pissed me off because I was such a fan of his, and he turned, and I like his DDP matches, I like the West Texas Rednecks, I like that, so it was kind of like, and then I kind of thought, like with Flair, how WWF had him as a caricature, basically, I think the Mr. Perfect was almost like a caricature. And then Hennig in WCW, he seemed more like a fleshed out guy to me.
I see what you're saying, and partly the fact that he's going by his real name in WCW could contribute to that. They can't do exactly that same character. And sort of the interesting case there is that I think he's the most similar to a Ric Flair-esque character in his WWF Federation era run, where what is Ric Flair, right? He's this very serious wrestler with a larger-than-life personality, especially as a heel, where he's cutting great promos, putting himself over that whole deal. The closest you got to that as a serious wrestler-type character probably was Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, and the World Wrestling Federation. So I think it made a lot of sense to go ahead and maybe address that similarity and the fact that they were such complementary characters and pairing them up when Flair had his run.
I almost think something else with Curt Hennig, comparing him in the WCW. Like, I know there's that Lords of London, or I think he had some kind of like policy like that. So, like, when I was actually watching the current like product at the time, what was current to me, and maybe it helped his aura a little bit more, or the mystique of Mr. Perfect, was when I saw him on TV, right? He showed up at WrestleMania as the referee in that title match with Lex Luger and Yokozuna. And then he kind of like, he kind of did like a turn or something and kind of cost a Lex Luger, like he didn't do the pinfall for him or whatever. Yeah. And then he disappeared. And then he came back in 95, and it was like a holy shit moment. Like they were going to start the pay-per-view, like they did the whole 30-minute countdown show thing. And then all of a sudden, right before they go live on the pay-per-view and do the little promo video,
ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Perfect!
Then he just comes out, like, unannounced. And it was like, holy shit, Mr. Perfect is back at Survivor Series. Then he stuck around and he was commentating. And then the next year, he was kind of mentor for Mark Marrow for a couple of weeks, leading him to the title. And then they did that little turn. So it seemed like they were trying to stick him into these roles. And I don't know if he could wrestle or he didn't want to. And then, so it seemed like he went to WCW. And at first, he didn't dog shit it, or at least to me, it didn't seem like he was half-assing it like some of those guys. So it almost seemed like a Savage situation where I don't know if they wanted to use him or didn't use him in WWF, but he still had good matches in WCW, whereas he could have been doing that in the WWF. But maybe he just didn't fit that era because they were kind of transitioning to that attitude at the time. Whereas, I don't know, would he have fit in with the Attitude Era or not?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. His WWF run, while it has a lot of peaks, is very sort of start-stop in its nature, where he's an active wrestler and then he gets hurt and he's on the shelf for a while and he comes back, but then he stops wrestling and like collects on this supposed Lloyd's insurance policy and comes back as just an on-air character, and then eventually he just leaves for WCW. So it's a little bit uneven. You look at his body of work, he has the tremendous Bret Hart match at SummerSlam 91, one of my favorite singles matches, I will say, but that's kind of his swan song, you know? And when he doesn't come back until, what, 93, late 92?
He does the Survivor Series. So he kind of goes almost Survivor Series to Survivor Series, like a year.
Yeah, Survivor Series to Survivor Series, exactly. So, and I thought that his comeback at that Survivor Series, that match was really, really good, where he's not my preferred character as a face, but they still played it off pretty well. The Loser Leaves Town match with him and Flair on Raw is really good. And then you look at his 1993, maybe the best match he has is that sort of rematch with Bret in the King of the Ring tournament. I know a lot of people have
that's a really good one too.
So much love for that match. Me, I'm sort of, it's good, but it's still not, peak Mr. Perfect.
I guess I could shorten up my point that I was trying to make earlier and just saying he maybe had more potential to do more with WWF, but they either didn't use him or they couldn't use him. I don't know.
Or they couldn't.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it just seems like a what could have been. Like, he could have been a key guy in the WWF still.
Right. And even if he couldn't perform at that same ability in WCW, he was more consistent, at least, in terms of he was pretty much always wrestling. I love the Horseman term, just like you, where I don't care how telegraphed it is looking back, or even that it was at the time. It's executed so very well. You want to see him as a horseman. You look at his past relationship with Flair, and it just should work so well. And then he turns, and he's just this shit-heel character that you instantly hate. And that's done just to perfection.
Another thing, too, is it's outside of our time frame. But in 2002, he did come back. He had that surprise, Royal Rumble run. And I didn't expect him to be in the Final Four. I think he was actually in the Final Three in that Rumble. And I was, totally marking out because I figured he'd just do what they do today where they have Hacksaw or Road Dogg come out. They just pop the crowd, and then they get thrown out right after that. But he hung in there for, 20 minutes. And he still hung around a little bit until I think that plane ride, and he got fired. Or the plane ride from hell, but
yes, the plane ride from hell.
He was kind of in that role that I'm talking about in 2002, where he kind of I think he even might have had a match with Steve Austin in the main event of a Raw, which was still kind of halfway decent, but he was still kind of putting over some of the younger guys. I think on Edge's DVD, there's a really quick Edge Mr. Perfect match.
I should track that down. I didn't know they had a match. I'm not surprised, but I don't know that I was paying that close attention at the time. So, yeah, he did some good work with Austin as well. I mean, he had stepped up his game when he made that return. You're right, which sort of makes me wonder, okay, was he dogging it a little in WCW? I don't know. He probably did have some limitations physically since they were working him as much as they were. I do like the Flair feud in WCW. I like the DDP feud as well. I think people have a tendency to maybe overlook some good matches he had with Dean Malenko in late '98 as well. And then you get into the whole West Texas Rednecks thing, which, I mean, that is pure character, pure gimmick. Can't really talk about the matches, but if you like it, you really like it, you know? I can see your argument, and I think for the sake of argument, I'm going to go WWF on Curt Hennig. You go WCW. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're split on him. So we do not have a consensus here. We do not have a clear winner. Not that we necessarily need one, but makes for a more interesting, livelier conversation.
We didn't actually discuss these in advance, but I do remember I sent you a text. Like one or two of these might be a wash for me, where I can't decide or it's too even. And this was one of those guys. But then I thought about it when I was actually compiling the list. I'm like, I don't want to do any washes. I want to go one or the other because I don't want to have like ties or something. Like I just rather would go all the way and not cheat. Yeah, like I don't want to do any cheats.
Who would you like to talk about next? I could go in a couple different directions, but
next I actually had one that he had a real short run in either promotion, but I thought of El Gigante, Giant Gonzalez.
All right.
I hate Giant Gonzalez, and so I really hate the El Gigante, but there was one match that made me want to put El Gigante in the so I've got him being better in WCW. One, it's not just the wardrobe being a factor, but there was a match, I think it was Great American Bash 91. Not in Censor 91, Great American Bash 91. He's wrestling, I think he's wrestling the One Man Gang. And the One Man Gang comes out with Kevin Sullivan. And I think it's that screen capture, or like a text I sent you, a picture of One Man Gang and Kevin Sullivan with their hair's all frizzled out. And they've got like the dark eyeshadow. El Gigante, he like is fired up in this match. And he's like hip tossing One Man Gang, I think, and doing some chops on him. And like, sure, he's very limited, but he seemed fired up. And it was like a 2-minute match, but I dug it because he was fired up. So I'm like, all right, that's why I'm going with El Gigante.
Wow. I mean, you certainly have to grade his matches on a curve. And El Gigante, one-man gang match on paper sounds completely dreadful.
Yeah, I was going to fast forward through it, but then I'm like, well, why is Kevin Sullivan a one-man gang? They got like eyeshadow on or something. Yeah. I can watch this. I mean,
let's face it, El Gigante is one of our favorite recurring characters in the pantheon of Place to Be Nation. I mean, we have El Gigante, I chloroform like ragu Kevin Sullivan until you make pussy. that whole deal, which he's not the most safe for work character, but that's okay. He does have, I won't call them good matches, but maybe better matches than you would at least expect in WCW early 90s. So, yeah, he doesn't have a long run in the WWF in 93, and nothing he does there is worth anyone's time. It just isn't. As much as our good friend Justin Rosero is somewhat forgiving of his work with The Undertaker, I know where he's coming from, but at the same time, it still is not any great shakes, and I don't think Justin would try to argue otherwise. So, yeah, I'm all right with that. Maybe he was booked better in the WWF, where they did treat him as this larger than life character, but it's still such a short run and with such poor performances that I will tip my cap to WCW. I'm fine with that. So we have now WCW in the lead here by one, surprisingly enough. I'm a little bit shocked by this. I have to be honest. This tide may turn, but I think we're pretty balanced in our analysis so far.
Next up on my list is a guy. It's actually the opposite of Ric Flair. 1 year in a company versus like a lifetime, and it's Mean Mark and The Undertaker. So obviously you got to go the World Wrestling Federation for that one, because The Undertaker is an iconic character. Yeah,
this one's a layup. I mean, what can you even say about his WCW stuff? It's, he's Mean Mark. He has like the one match with Lex Luger that, if you remember any WCW matches of Mark Calloway, it might be that one.
Oh, well, he was a skyscraper, I think. Didn't it start with Sid, and it puts the lotion on its skin, Danny Spivey? And then I think, didn't Sid puncture a lung or something like that happened? Or
something like that, yes. You're right.
Yeah, so then he was replaced with Mean Mark.
Became the new skyscraper, yes.
Yeah.
I think your skyscraper foo is stronger than mine, and that's okay. But that does ring a bell. So, but still, I mean, there's no comparison. You're right. It's not even. This is a runaway. The most. I mean, you're right. It is the inverse of Flair, but even the brief spell that we have to look at and analyze in WCW of The Undertaker, Mark Calloway is no comparison to Ric Flair's WWF year. So, yep, okay. Now we are tied with WWF getting the advantage here.
The next guy I have, he was a flip-flopper even more than Ricky Steamboat, and it's Sid Vicious.
Oh, gosh. I was thinking about this one as we came into the episode, and want to talk about guys who are almost a wash. Man, this is a tough one. So, all right, where do you stand on Sid? What's your case for him?
I don't know if you can go by the matches and compare the matches, so I tried to compare other, like, outside criteria than just matches. And when you go with WCW, there's, the why me? And he's getting his car smashed and stuff. Or he was
Goldberg!
he was a Sid in flip-flops and stuff. But What I went with was the WWF just because of it was a short run, basically like a year again, or like not even a year. But when he came back in '96 until like mid-'97, but I'm just calling him fist bumping Sid. That's what I went with because he'd come out, he fist bump everybody, and he had his name in like the Sid sparklers and stuff. That was just cool. So that's why I went with Sid, and he was champion then, and he hit Jose Lothario with a camera.
I forgot about that. Thank you. That may have sealed it for me too.
I am the champion of the world. That says it all. That says that I am the man. That says that I am the master and the ruler of the world.
Man, Sid, he's tough because he's a guy that no matter what he did was just always so over. Just always popular, no matter how dumb or shitty his booking was. He always connected with people, and I do
fist
think
bumps. Yeah.
What? Do what?
I said, yeah, like he's connected with people, giving them fist bumps.
He's giving fist bumps, yeah. And I mean, people just dig the guy, and you look at the late '80s Sid from his debut. You know, Sid Vicious. We talked about the skyscrapers, which I think kind of put him on the map. But then he becomes Sid Justice in the WWF. It's the two are sort of a wash. It's not like he was doing great work in the WWF. I know his character sort of heated up after he did the heel turn, but is it far and away better than like his skyscrapers and then horseman work? Not really. Goes back to WCW with the '93 stuff, which is sort of amazing in a way. The Beach Blast mini movie, like you said, the guys in flip flops and sandals on the beach. I'm picturing it now.
Then he was there for the Shockmaster debut.
Yes, he's the guy, we've talked about this before, he's the one guy who tried, bless his heart, to salvage the Shockmaster debut in promo. Yeah. So he was sort of doing the Lord's work there.
The Lord's work.
Let's face it, right? After something like that.
I don't care who you are, boy! I don't give a damn who you are!
I don't, his 1995 in WWF kind of sucked to me.
It did.
It really did, right?
It's not very good. He didn't have good match. Like I don't know. People like dog him and say he didn't have good matches, but like he actually really.
It's not just that. It's not just the matches though, right?
He didn't have good matches, but I think it was maybe the character too, because even Justin was saying something recently, like when I was reading some of their articles where they were going through the 95 stuff and like posting their recaps and their matches. And they're talking about how in 95, the summer of 95, they kind of made him the chicken shit heel or something too. And like, you can't do that to Sid. And then it's like 95 is like night and day against 96.
It is.
Because he came in and he's like a monster and he's just like power bombing guys. But in 95, he like walked away from like one match, and took the chicken shit route.
And it's not just that he was having bad matches. He was having bad match after bad match with the same guys. Like look at the Diesel feud where it was just all shit with the in your house stuff. And I mean he had he was so instrumental in turning Shawn babyface, but it was just so all downhill from there.
I think it's Tatanka. He brought people down and sucked them down into his black hole of suck. Because he was teaming up with Tatanka in 95 in the corporation, and Tatanka like brought him down into Suckville, and even in 94, 93, Lex Luger. He was buddies with Tatanka, and then they started feuding, and Lex Luger was feuding with Tatanka, and it sucked. So I'm just going to blame Tatanka for just.
It is similar. Well, and he got sucked into the black hole of suck that was the $1 Million Corporation as well. So that was a big problem. And you're right, though. His 90, like if you had cut it off at 95, I think clear advantage goes WCW. Not that it's once again a runaway, but it's an easier argument to make. But then you look at his 96, where he just really takes off. And as you said, it's a night and day comparison. The intensity of his character, the better matches that he's having, working with guys like Shawn. And that sort of continues into 97 as well. And he also benefited from the fact that he never really got stale, because it's not like he was on every single show. He had these sort of fits and starts throughout this run, which was sort of to his benefit.
There's one thing, maybe this helps me go with WWF. One thing that's always like stuck out with me, there was one Raw where I was watching it live, and Shawn Michaels and Ahmed Johnson were going to name their new partner because Ultimate Warrior was supposed to be their partner, but then they had that contract dispute, and that's one of the times where they did a real-life thing on TV. They're like, Ultimate Warrior's out because of a contract dispute or something. So Shawn and Ahmed, they had them like live via satellite from the studio. Ahmed and Shawn are like, hey, our partner's on the way. He's coming. We'll reveal him. And then they cut back again, and Cornette was saying, like, I think Cornette might have been on commentary or something with, and he's like, you guys don't have a partner. And then all of a sudden, like, you could kind of see somebody's shoulders, like, ducking down behind Shawn Michaels. And all of a sudden, like, Shawn Michaels is like, our partner's here. And he, like, moves out of the way, or Sid kind of turns around and appears behind Shawn Michaels and towers over him. And he's, like, starts cutting some promo.
Twice he's opened the gates of hell, and he has released me. This time for you, Cornette, and the Cornette camp. There's nothing. There's no good news. I could hear you screaming out for help. For help.
And like Jim Cornette's looking like he's gonna like shit his pants. And it was actually like really cool. So I don't know. I was young.
And even better than doing the Ultimate Warrior. So it was one of those cases where the substitute guy, because of a bullshit, sort of real life issue, was an improvement on whatever the plan going in was.
It just helped kind of seal the deal with Sid, because I think even the next week they did one of those things where they didn't do it a lot back then, but they almost had one of those things where they had a camera, I think, in the parking lot, and I can't remember how it went down, but there was some kind of brawl with like Camp Cornette and Shawn Michaels and his buddies.
Hey, it's an ambush! Look out, it's an ambush! Camp Cornette didn't leave! Vader, bulldog! Kill somebody, McMahon! Get out of there, Jimmy! Get a car, get out of there! Look at that lunatic! He's crazy, McMahon! Look at him!
I mean, at that point, now you're at the stage of, okay, you draw a line on this guy's career after 97. Now you sort of flip-flopped and you have to go advantage WWF. But he has a third run in WCW. He makes that return in 1999, goes into 2000. He's pretty consistent in terms of his character and booking throughout that stretch, but I don't think it's anything that really was next level, put him over the top. I mean, yeah, we've joked about the Goldberg stuff, and he leans pretty heavily into that master and ruler of the world thing that was so cool with him. But it's just, it's not a great period for WCW in general, so nobody is quite that breakout star. So while it gives his, I think, later WWF period some competition, it's not enough to overcome it, but it is pretty close. So I guess with you, I am by inches, I mean, we're talking inches, I will say better in WWF, Sid Vicious / Sid Justice.
The next guys I have are kind of like a twofer, and it's kind of like a thing where you can't really even compare them that much. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, I have WCW.
Okay, yep. So similar case to Ric Flair, right? So sort of the argument and the consideration that we would give to these two guys as a team, same rules as apply what we said for Ric Flair. So brief WWF run, while they were there, very, very good, but just not enough to compete with what they had done in the WCW. So that's an easier one. So where are we at in our score here? What are our rankings? Are we tied again?
Looks like WCW's in the lead 5-4 with one tie.
Okay, WCW in the lead here. So why don't we, at this point, take a break? Seems like a good place to pull up for a break, get you some relief, make yourself a glass of iced tea, a Dr. Slice, or as we discussed before the show, a Tom Arnold. Not to be confused with an Arnold Palmer. So do what you got to do. We will be back on the other side to continue this survey. See you then.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We offer them to you on two great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, along with Main Event, Survey Says, the Monday Night Wars, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction show, as well as Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network podcasts and pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Match of the Week podcast, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Through the Years, Worldcast, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Center Stage, and Letters from Kayfabe, plus much more. And on our very popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, NBA Team, PTBN Play, Sunday Groove, Breaking Balls, and Lucha Undead.
As well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans.
With the Hard Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversations, Geek and Sassy, and Marvel Age podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback today. All these shows, plus others, available at PlaceStation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlaceStation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, and thehistoryofwrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation, it is me, the manager, Todd Weber, and I'm here to tell you all about a brand new show on the PTBN Pop feed. It's Talkin' Pop. Each month, hosts Jennifer Smith and Tim Capel discuss the hottest topics in pop culture along with their special guests. Funny, illuminating, and even sometimes a bit naughty, Talkin' Pop is our latest and greatest legendary Place to Be Nation podcast. So be sure to join Jenny and Tim every single month on Talkin' Pop. Proudly part of the PTBN Pop feed on iTunes, Stitcher, and PlaceToBeNation.com. The only place to be in your pop culture world.
WCW, what the big boys wear.
Oh! Hey folks, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And if you want one of these WCW with a big boy play t-shirts, this is how you get them.
Just call 1-800-WCW-8661 or write to the address on your screen.
They're rough and tough.
Get your very own Big Boys t-shirt for just $19.95 plus $5.95 shipping and handling.
One size fits most. Tough guy.
Andy, it's Tony Schiavone. Hey, man, I'm sorry I missed you. How are you doing? Calling to thank you for getting the T-shirt from us back in March, and I'm sorry, Andy, it's taken so long to place this phone call, but thanks very much. Hopefully you're enjoying the podcast. Andy, appreciate you being out there. Again, Tony Schiavone. Looks like you bought 2 shirts from us, so thank you for doing that. And again, sorry it's taken so long. Andy, take care, buddy. Thanks.
Why me? Why me? Why me?
Welcome back, Survey Says fans. This is Tim Capel with Andy Savage Helene. We are running through talent that had careers in both WCW and the WWF at the time that both promotions existed and were giving each other competition. We did 10 in our first half of this show. We're going to try to run through another 10 in our second half. Now, before we get to that, we have a bit of housekeeping, as we often do. Longtime listeners of this program are familiar with our WCW Survey Says Fan of the Month Club. We have something a little bit different on this episode, do we not, Andy? What do we have on tap? Who are we giving the honors to, and how are we changing up our format for this episode?
Well, this month, doing something a little bit different. We're going to honor a long-time listener, first-time caller. Instead of Fan of the Month, she is going to be crowned, ooh yeah, the Miss NWO of Survey Says, Jennifer Smith.
Let's throw a special party. Slim Jims for everybody. What do you think?
Yes, Jenny, at long last, my podcasting co-host on my other show, on the other Place to Be Nation feed, Place to Be Nation Pop, on Talkin' Pop, Jenny Smith, each and every month, myself and Jenny running through the fuck shit junk of the day, as we call it. Jenny began listening to Survey Says probably a few months back, and in very short order has listened to every episode to date. So I feel like she's really been chomping at the bit here to claim the Survey Says Fan of the Month prize, but we're going to give her an altogether different honorific in a class by herself, and sort of in honor of our previous episode on the New World Order. She is Miss NWO. So this puts Jenny in the company of such luminaries as the biker chick at Sold Out 1997 who got to make out with Eric Bischoff, yeah, and I'm afraid to say it, but sex offender Pamela Roger at the Spring Breakout Nitro in 1999 was a Miss NWO, but be that as it may, we will not belabor the point there. Jenny, nonetheless, is in a class by herself. She's one of my very favorite people in the world, getting her just due. I hope she recognizes and realizes the one-time only nature of what we are bestowing upon her with this crown here. So no one else will ever be able to say they are the Survey Says Miss NWO recipient. So congratulations to Jenny. So
well, I didn't want to seem like when you said, "Hey, like we have a loyal listener been listening," I don't know, I didn't want to seem like we're playing favorites either, because now she's your other co-host.
Yeah. No, she had to earn it.
I don't want to be partial like NWO referee Nick Patrick. I don't want to play sides. I want to be.
We don't want to be accused of favoritism here on Survey Says. So yeah. I think we had enough of a buffer between when I started working professionally as we do, because we're nothing if not professional on Talkin' Pop, myself and Jenny. But there's enough distance between the debut of that show and the continuation of this one.
You're always talking about butts.
We are always talking about butts. We're all butts. We're all ass on Survey Says. So, yeah, I think we're in the free and clear, giving Jenny this recognition. So, and I feel very good about that, and it's well deserved. This is a meritocracy, you have to understand, when we give these shout-outs. This is not some biased system of favoritism. There's no bullshit politics in the back. This is all straight up.
It's real to me, damn it.
It is real. It's real to you. It's real to me. It's real to all of us. Damn it.
Well, then let's get back into it. And we figured we were going to run a little bit long because we've got a long list of guys, but we thought we'd chop it up a little bit.
Yeah, there will be some. You may wonder, well, what about so-and-so? Well, stay tuned. I think we will revisit this topic in subsequent months, because there's a lot to talk about here, and we want to give ourselves room to stretch out a little bit and save some for a rainy day.
After we pick a topic, and I'll text you a lot before we sit down and record a show,
I would like you to unleash on me now who our next subject is.
Next up is a guy that we've talked about quite a bit, but more his theme song than his body of work, I think. Ravishing Rick Rude.
This is a tricky one. A little bit. All right, so I think everybody knows him from his WWF run primarily, but a lot of his WCW work was at a much higher level, and although he was playing a pretty similar character, I want to say he was booked better and probably having better matches, and still at a level where he could, for the most part, go physically. So this is one of those cases where you don't want to just give it to the WWF because WWF was better branded, had more recognition than WCW. You really have to take it down to the level of, okay, let's look at the guy and his run and his accomplishments in both promotions, even if those two promotions weren't necessarily on equal footing during the time frame when you're making this comparison. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Gosh, I like his look better in WCW, I will say that. He had cut his hair, he kind of dropped the weird Magnum PI 70s porn star holdover thing, that he had for so much of his WWF run. He was having really good matches with Ricky Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes. Of course, the great Dangerous Alliance angle. He wins the International World Heavyweight Championship, the fake World Championship, if you will, even though it was the big gold belt. So his accolades far exceed what he ever accomplished in the WWF. And on that basis, I think I have to, not to mention his theme song, how much have we talked about, like you said, the WCW, especially second theme song of Rick Rude that we love so very much. So on pretty much every dimension you can measure him on, I give it to WCW for Rick Rude.
Same here. I went WCW as well. It was kind of a shorter, well, it was like 2 years. He was kind of injured for part of it.
He was, yeah. So
and I think it was a solid, well, it was like 3 years, in the WWF? Well, 87, 88, 89, and most of 90. But he kind of came in halfway through 87. So still like 3 years. And he was in big stables. He was in the Heenan family. So it kind of matches up pretty well. He won titles in either. He had like an iconic manager, Heenan, Heyman, and the stables.
Yeah. He's one of those guys who had a pretty natural progression as a character where he starts out as a mid-carder and he stays kind of at that same level for a while. And then he gets kind of the big push, still, again, playing the same character, but now he's a main eventer. The difference being he's in different promotions during these different phases of his career. When he debuted in WCW, he was pretty much a main eventer from the outset, you know?
Yeah. He was more intense. I guess it's a different and maybe dimension to his character, but he seemed more intense. So yeah, definitely. He was more of what he already was. It just took it up to 11, right? Yeah.
So, all right, we will give the circle gets the square, WCW for Rick Rude. So I think on our scoreboard now, WCW is ahead by 2, right?
Yeah, I think 6-4.
Wow. This is impressive. I mean, I know we're a WCW show, but we weren't trying to exhibit any bias here in this analysis, so we're sort of surprising ourselves. But all right, what's the next one on the agenda here?
Next up is another tricky one, which was more of a trickier one than like Ravishing Rick Rude, maybe on the level of Curt Hennig. It's Dustin Rhodes.
This is quite the conundrum for me.
He kind of had basically the same time frame. Like you can say 91, 92, 93, 94, and then 95, 96, 97, 98. So basically kind of 4 years or so. I think he kind of came back in WCW toward the end. Like, didn't he do the face painted thing?
Well, yeah, they were going to bring him in as 7 in 1999 or 2000. I can't remember exactly which year, but immediately, I guess it was 2000, immediately abandoned that, and he went back to being just Dustin Rhodes, which he wasn't playing the natural Dustin Rhodes, like the same character from the early 90s, but, you know, he was going by his real name, kind of similar in personality. Gosh, I don't know. This is one of those deals where it's just personal preference almost, where he played such dramatically different characters, and it's like, which one do I like better?
Kurt Kilberg really helped out, to give that shout out in there. That's one of the things that I took, one of the main takeaways from these tapes of the early WCW that I saw in the early 90s, was I really dug him in that tag team with Barry Windham. I thought it was awesome, and it kind of blew me away. It was like a Southern, like I hadn't really watched a whole lot of Southern wrestling. And I guess Dustin can play that underdog role really well.
Yeah, you're right. I really taken to what I have seen of that, but I haven't seen that much of it. And on the other hand, I have seen a lot of Goldust, and I love the Goldust character. And I think we've talked about a little bit of that in the past, but I really just go for that character so much that enough waffling, I think I have to just put my cards on the table and say I like Goldust better than earlier preceding WCW Dustin Rhodes. So that's where I'm at. I reserve the right to change my mind as I maybe see more of Dustin's WCW run prior to that. I need more of an education there. I don't think it really. I don't think his return and late '99, 2000s offers a lot in the way of competition. Not that it was bad by any means, but I don't think it's enough to push me over the edge. I'm going to go Goldust. So WWF here. I'm calling it. What about you, my friend?
That's what I did as well. I went with WWF because it was like a tough one for me because I grew up with the WWF. I had no idea who he was. I thought he was like somebody completely new. And then in '97, when they started creeping into that Attitude Era, they referenced his dad. And he had that kind of JR, I think, sit-down style thing, maybe, interview, too, like this with Mankind. Uh-huh. He kind of did that, too, where he was talking about his dad.
To gain his own identity, Dustin had to walk away from his past. Dustin Runnels completely reinvented himself. The result? Goldust, the most bizarre, controversial, and outrageous superstar in history. In his quest to escape his father's shadow, Dustin took an enormous risk.
I was scared as hell. I felt like peeing in my pants. I knew that this was going to shock the heck out of people. I knew it as soon as I walked through the curtain, and it did.
I don't know. I really like Goldust in '97, where he kind of turned into a face, and he kind of had some of that underdog. Like he worked his Dustin Rhodes like style into that character, into his ring work. Going back and rewatching the '95, '96 matches, he's just more focused on the character, and like his heel ring work was a lot of like, I guess, chin locks and like that slower, like I think JR would say methodically paced like style.
Methodical pace, yeah.
I thought in '97 he kind of had a good balance where he was Goldust, but he still did like the the hot moves like the clotheslines that he would do, or I think he mixed in the flip flop and fly. Yeah, the bulldogs and stuff. And I guess I just went with that. The WWF totally reinvented himself as his character, kind of like basically what the Undertaker did.
Okay. All right, so I was a little bit surprised. We were on the same page for that one, but that makes this a little bit easier. We don't want to go in opposite directions because it makes it a little bit more interesting, I think, that we get to a conclusion and perhaps a clear winner in this. So we'll see how as we progress here. Who is next?
What's next, I guess.
What may be next?
I kind of threw this in as like a jokey kind of thing on the list, but the Insane Clown Posse, they had a tenure in either promotion, so I just kind of threw them on there because I was trying to come up with a very in-depth like list with deep cuts and then the big heavy hitters.
So. You know what the thing is? Like, if you want to take that seriously, these guys and their consideration, it's actually kind of hard.
Yeah, because they actually wrestled in WCW, whereas I think WWF, they just were kind of like, they rap with the oddities. So
his characters, yeah.
They were kind of dog shit wrestlers, but at least there's kind of like the WWF, it was basically they were strictly in one role, whereas in WCW, they kind of, had him in both roles.
All right, so let's try to be somewhat legitimate here. So the extent of their WWF work and that run was just the oddities thing, right? Am I forgetting anything else they did? That was it, just that summer, isn't it?
I think summer and kind of fall, because I want to say, yeah. I haven't really revisited any of this stuff, but I almost want to say, was it the Oddities that feuded with the Headbangers?
I think they were with the Oddities at first, and then they turned on them. Because didn't they like cut Luna's hair or something?
Maybe they did. All I remember is that period's kind of murky, but I just remember...
And they cut, like, all her fucking hair off. I mean, she had that... Maybe it was extensions, I don't know, but just that long-ass weave that she had, and they basically defrocked her. I mean, it was crazy.
Huh.
And I think they ultimately sided with the Headbangers in that feud.
That's what it was.
I may be conflating different events, but that's sort of how it...
Isn't that when they wore the foam belts and they were the tag team champions of the universe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought I kind of liked them then. Like, I know the Headbangers were kind of never really like a prominent role, but they were kind of good wrestlers on Heat.
Right. So that kind of, there's a little something to that. So what's it up against? When they came to WCW, I don't remember exactly when.
It was the Dark Carnival, or was it earlier than that? Wasn't it with Raven? That's all I remember. Is they came with Raven at first.
Right. So they you're right. So initially it was Raven, and wasn't it called the Deadpool?
Oh, that's right. Then it was the Dark Carnival.
Then it was the Dark Carnival with Muta, as I say.
Yeah. Muta. That's how you say it.
Muta. Yeah.
Or JR goes Muta or something. He says it completely different too, I think.
The Great Muta. Yeah. And Vampiro was part of that as well. I distinctly remember ICP in the summer of '99, the great pay-per-view that we always seem to reference on this show, Road Wild '99. They had that match, the tag with Raven and Vampiro and the Filthy Animals, I believe, which was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I'll agree, because I hated the Insane Clown Posse. Like, and I still do, but there was a kid in high school. I had classes with him every year of high school, but it was like random. Like, one year we had PE class together. One year I think we had English class. Another year we had, like, history class. But
now, okay, is this the one that would try to shake your hand and bring you in for the stunner or whatever?
That guy, I only had one class with him ever, and it was PE sophomore year, his first year in our high school. And then I never had another class with him, but I'd see him in the hallways or at lunch, I think, or something. This other guy that I'm talking about now, he was a huge, diehard Insane Clown Posse fan, and that is all he wore. Every single day was an Insane Clown Posse shirt. And it wasn't...
He was a juggalo.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the... I'm sorry, I forgot the term. He was a juggalo, and he wore a shirt, but it wasn't the same shirt every day. He must have had, like, I don't know, like a bunch of them.
A shirt for every occasion.
He knew I liked wrestling, but he seemed to... The only wrestling that he really talked about was he loved the ECW hardcore style. So, of course, he loved the Juggalo champion shit style. And it's like, God, that is shit. I don't want to talk about this. So it's like, it almost was like I was outed as a wrestling fan because I purposely outed myself by talking about it all the time. But then you kind of attract the company that you don't want.
Yes.
It's like, oh, God. It's like, I'm talking about, it's like people know I'm a wrestling fan, but then I've got those two guys who are like the bad wrestling fans, and I feel like shit, I'm lumped in with them. I'm like, I don't know. So that's why it was
It's lost the flame is what happened here.
That's why it was so nice to years later. Like, I found people online like you and like Steve Willie and JT Rosero, the big Grand Poobah, and all those guys. Like, it was nice to actually have normal people for once who are wrestling fans and not like, God, that kind of give it a bad name. Maybe I sound like I'm an elitist wrestling fan or something.
I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes you want to have interests that are just your interest in your hobby that you do not rearrange your entire life around and that you use to define yourself as a person. So I think that's sort of what it comes down to. Not that I'm trying to knock anybody, but I believe I know where you're coming from, especially with respect to ICP and some of their wrestling ventures. But before Juggalo Championship Wrestling was a thing, they had their WCW run, really 2 runs, like you said. This 1999 period, and then came back for the Dark Carnival. Do you remember the great spot where Mike Awesome power bombs or awesome bombs Shaggy 2-Dope on the hood of the ambulance?
No, but I gotta see this now. I gotta see.
Oh,
this.
You don't remember this?
No.
Oh my God. Okay, so it's an ambulance match, I think, or maybe they just interfered in an ambulance match. This is during Russo booking WCW. Okay, so let me make that clear. But they get on top of the ambulance, and Mike Awesome, who is then, I don't know if is he that 70s guy or is he Fat Chick Thriller Mike Awesome? I don't remember exactly, but he does his like running crucifix powerbomb on Shaggy 2-Dope on the roof of the ambulance. The problem was he had such momentum that when he hit the power bomb, Shaggy 2-Dope continues like sliding on this ambulance.
I can picture it now.
Oh no! That's 10 feet in the air! 10 feet in the air! Awesome bomb! Not an awesome bomb on that 70s! Oh! No! Awesome bomb! Awesome bomb! Down goes Shaggy! Down goes Shaggy!
Rolls right off top of it. Just hits the floor. So, yeah, that was a great spot, unintentionally. So, maybe for that alone, I have to give it to WCW for these guys.
I gave it to WCW because I was not an ICP fan, but I came across that Road Wild pay-per-view in like a tape trade, like not a Kurt Kilberg one, but like predates that one. I think that opened the show. It was like Eddie, Ray, and like Kidman against Vampiro and the ICP, right? And Raven was on the outside. I think.
Raven was just on the outside, yep.
Yeah, sure, most people have a good match with Eddie Guerrero, but I mean, like, still, I was kind of blown away by it because I wasn't expecting anything, so I'm like...
Yep.
I kind of did like that ICP song that they used for Vampiro's music, like Take It or something. I kind of like that.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah, that's not on the network, is it? I think they took it out. I think it's one of those things that they have dubbed over, which is too bad because that was very good. I also just admire their hustle, right? So they worked for the WWF for a few months, and then they went on. I think they even did a little bit of stuff for ECW, and then went to WCW where they got that Turner fuck money. So I have to give it up for anybody who has that kind of hustle and can make that money. So good for them. Who or what do we have next?
We've got one of the faces of fear, the Barbarian.
Barbie. So,
who was a participant in Dusty Rhodes' favorite WCW tag team match.
That's right. He very much was. So that's going to gain a lot of points from the outset. I always think of him as just a tag guy. Am I missing anything? Did he ever have a notable singles run in either promotion?
In WWF, he was the Powers of Pain with the Warlord. Then they split them up. Warlord was with Slick. Barbarian was with Heenan. So he did kind of have a solo right there, and that's where he wore the fur boots and like the antlers.
I'm thinking of the Berserker when you mentioned fur boots.
Oh, but no, this was before the Berserker. This was like 90 and 91. He was with Heenan, and there's like he wrestled the Big Boss Man at Royal Rumble 91.
Oh, that's right.
And there was
this is because Rick Rude talked shit about his mother.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm with you. I'd forgotten about that match. But so, I mean, he was kind of just cannon fodder in the Heenan family as a singles guy. He never really rose to any sort of prominence. Powers of Pain has run with the Warlord. It's one of those things that if you know them, the Powers of Pain, but if you don't, you really don't, you know?
Yeah.
WCW-wise, I mean, you have Faces of Fear with Meng. Man, I'm a Faces of Fear mark. I don't know what to say. I just really go for them. I can't think of much else he did that was prominent outside of the Faces of Fear. I mean, they did like the first family reunion in '99 with Jimmy Hart. That was like they had sort of kicked Meng out, and it was Barbarian and Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So they kicked out the coolest one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is, they kicked him out because they needed someone to feud with. You had a whole bunch of like Barbarian Meng matches after they broke up, which were not very good, but at the same time were very watchable because it's Barbarian and Meng.
It's like stiffing the crap out of each other.
Yes, exactly. Man, I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go with these guys because it's basically between Powers of Pain and Faces of Fear. And if you're going to make that kind of comparison, then, okay, you've got Barbarian as the constant in this equation versus the Warlord or Meng. So, come on. Meng's the man.
Oh, so you're saying judge him on his tag team partner, right?
I think you have to.
Well, I guess that's almost the way I went, but I went with WCW on him, which I think is where you're leaning.
I am.
I went in this direction. I was like, but I don't want to watch any of his WWF matches because they're all in that style of like, it's all the same style. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. When it's early 90s, late 80s, like style.
It's all kind of shit.
Yeah, like a lot of them are basically like a template. You could either plug Warlord in against somebody or the Barbarian in against somebody or Earthquake in against somebody. You have that kind of style. But with WCW, his matches are a lot more watchable because even like I was kind of blown away by the one I talked about on the Starrcade show. It was the Faces of Fear and the Outsiders, and the Faces of Fear are basically like playing the faces there actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had the good tag team match at that Uncensored where it's just a big brawl. I think there's something where there's like an old video I saw on YouTube. Meng starts dancing they must have been like wrestling the Public Enemy. Meng starts dancing. I think Barbarian starts dancing, and I think Heenan calls him like the Bongo Barian or something like that. Like I think they were like taunting Public Enemy. But yeah, I have to go WCW because it seemed like they had just more watchable stuff.
Right. I mean, while we're on the subject, why don't we talk about Meng? For me, it's WCW hands down with Meng. You know, we've already talked about the Faces of Fear. What do you compare that to? Haku, the Head Shrinkers. I guess you have there may be something to be said for the Colossal Powers.
Colossal Connection?
Excuse me, Colossal Connection. I conflated them with Jurassic Powers. But in any case, it's just Meng, to me, even outside of the tag stuff that he did, you had the How many promos did they do in WCW for the Monster Meng?
A week from tomorrow night, you and Raph. Now, here's a man that perhaps is equal to you. The fact that he is 6'7", 6'8", and weighs well over 300 pounds should be a great contest.
Wait a
minute. We are in America, please. You can speak English. You've been here long enough. We all know that. Now you're speaking Japanese. As friends, let's talk English. Now that's Frank. Bonjour. Please, here in World Championship Wrestling, Meng. You understand, adios?
Adios. And the Goldberg squashes. He was always the guys that they would throw at Goldberg to very good effect. Even his, he had a series of matches in 1997 against one Chris What's-His-Face. They were pretty good. He was always a really solid hand, I think, in WCW. My God, the whole stud stable where he was brought in as the bodyguard, where you get one of my sort of low key favorites of Meng in a suit before he had even really started wrestling. That's kind of a runaway for me, surprisingly or not enough. What about you?
Yeah, I went with WCW pretty clearly, too. He did have some good stuff. Not really good, but notable. He was King Haku, and then he was in the Islanders. He really wasn't a tag guy. Like Barbarian, you think of him... I guess he was a tag guy in the Islanders, but then he still had the solo stuff, too. So he wasn't, I guess, as much of a tag guy as what you think Barbarian is always the tag guy. And I like that they kind of like rebranded him, like you were saying, as that silent guy with Colonel Parker with the sunglasses on. He was like that silent bodyguard. And then it's even like, oh man, he came back later on, wasn't it? And they did the hardcore division.
Yeah. He was hardcore champion.
Yeah.
And then he made the jump back to the WWF while he was still hardcore champion.
Yeah.
For that sort of brief period while both were still around.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. But
because he showed up at that Royal Rumble.
That
and
Royal
teamed
Rumble,
up with
Royal Rumble
kind of
2001, I think it was.
Yep.
WCW now firmly in the lead here, isn't it?
Oh, because weren't they just paying him by appearance at that time? And
WCW was, yes.
Yeah, and so that's when he just jumped.
Run out. So that was somewhat foolish on their part, but WCW, everybody, The
next guy, I just threw him in line because I was going through the tag teams, is the Warlord, and he actually was in like WCW, or it was actually NWA briefly because the Powers of Pain. They were a tag team in like '88 in the NWA, and I think.
Okay.
They were on the early Clash of the Champions, I think, like those shows. I think they were faces and they wrestled the Russian Assassin and like Ivan Koloff and stuff like that. They did like Russian like chain matches or barbed wire matches or something. But it was really brief.
I don't know that I ever realized that or have seen Warlord in WCW. So just on the basis of what I've seen.
Or in Crockett, I guess.
Crockett, sure. Yeah, that's fair game. But just judging from what I have actually seen, it's just WWF by default.
So that's why I threw him on there. But I went with WWF because he's a little bit more... you kind of proved my point. He's more known for the WWF. With like the Phantom of the Opera mask and stuff too. Or teaming up with Slick. And had like the wand with the W. I think he barely had that for a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of a formality, but an interesting case to look at and just to acknowledge that, he really was in both promotions, and he's a guy with a pretty distinctive look, so it's not like you can really get away with repackaging him, but so much.
you know?
I remember this with the Warlord. Because, you know, he had the bald head and the goatee. I would always rent, like, videotapes when I'd go to my grandparents' house, like, in Indiana. There was, like, some tag with, like, Flair and DiBiase and Mountie and the Warlord. And my grandpa was, like, convinced that was Stone Cold Steve Austin because he was popular he was popular on the current product. And here I am watching, like, a tape, and it's like he's got that kind of look. So, I mean, if you're not really paying attention, you see some bald guy with a goatee. But then if you look more closer, you'll see he's, like, a lot more jacked up than Austin was.
I've always thought he looked like an inflated version of Stone Cold Steve Austin.
An inflated version.
Always. So I will back up your grandpa on that. Good stuff. So, all right, we've now got WWF kind of starting to make a comeback here. Who's next?
This is one that was kind of on the surface. It went one way, but when I dug a little deeper, it went another way, and it's Jim Duggan. Hello!
Oh, okay. I can see how this can be a difficult one, and I think it's tricky for me only because I really dislike Hacksaw Jim Duggan in any version.
Same here. Like, I mean, yeah. Like, I don't really like him.
You don't like him either, so.
And yeah, he's one of those guys that, yeah, when you think of him in WCW, he came in at the time when Hogan came in and won the title. So he's one of those Hogan guys because Hogan showed up. You have Duggan showing up. And Honky Tonk Man became TV champion. Duggan became U.S. champion. And squash, like, Steve Austin. So it's like you want to hate it. If you're like, you know, guys like us, you kind of want to hate it because you're like, man, what are they doing? You know, they're kind of squashing their own guys, like in favor these WWF guys. But at the same time, why I went WCW actually was because he seemed, maybe I'm wrong, but he seemed to be more involved in some storylines. Or maybe it's just my memory is not as good anymore, but in WWF, he was basically just the all-American ho, and I can't think of anything that he actually did that was noteworthy other than when he first showed up. And I think he was sitting in the crowd during Nikolai Volkov matches and, like, antagonizing him when he'd sing the Russian national anthem and he'd chase him off or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
But with the WCW, he was the U.S. champ, and he had that really good match with Vader at that Starrcade. Then he did all the tape fist stuff. That was kind of his gimmick for a while in '95. So at least they kind of plugged him into some storylines or something. It seemed like WWF, I don't know, he was just kind of there just to pop the crowd, you know, at the house shows or something.
I can see what you're saying. It's almost like WCW, in order to try to justify the contract that they probably extended to him, were trying to get more value out of the guy, and he was more accomplished in terms of, yeah, he won the U.S. title, found the television title, but the way that he did that were such turnoffs to me, just like you were saying, that I almost kind of have to set them aside. He did have a decent 94. You mentioned that Vader match. I was thinking the same thing. An okay 95, but oh man, so much of that. It's just, like I said, I don't like the guy either way, but comparing the two promotions, he seemed like more of a just go-to guy, solid hand in WWF in terms of this is a character who we can look to that will reliably pop the crowd if nothing else, but we at least have the sense not to try to give him titles or anything.
See, like, I think that, yeah, that's the only thing. When you think of Duggan matches, like in WWF. Can you think of anything?
No, not.
And so, see, with WCW, I can think of that Vader one that I like. So that's why I went that way. I'm like, I can at least pinpoint something.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I don't like the guy either way. If you could even describe him as in any way iconic, which maybe he is for some people, I think you just have to look at the WWF run. So these are my own biases showing, admittedly, and I'm kind of leaning into my own biases, but maybe for the sake of just argument or
well, who other's biases are you going to have other than your own? So I mean,
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I will go WWF.
Ooh, so we got another draw there.
We got another draw. Yep, which that's going to happen. I mean, on these things.
Although with the WWF thing, you do have that one like soundtrack song where it was like, "Hacksaw Jim Duggan, but beats people up." It was like on that remix album, WWF WrestleMania, the album.
I got my 2x4.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm sitting in the back of the arena. I'm waiting to go out the curtain. I hear that crowd, and I just go, oh! And I think he's like doing some voiceover like that.
Yes. Place V Nation wrestling favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
OG Vintage Vault. Represent. All right. So we've not made any sort of progress here with Jim Duggan. Let's try to do better. Who's our next subject?
I don't think we're gonna do better. Too Cold Scorpio, Flash Funk.
Oh, okay. He's a guy I saw so much potential in what I've seen of his WCW work, like in the early 90s, sort of setting aside his affiliation in our favorite WCW tag team of Hung and Bung with Marcus Alexander Bagwell. But as a singles guy, really good stuff. And I think we've talked about before, way ahead of his time. But they didn't do a good job of capitalizing on that. And you compare that to his WWF work, it's sort of a precursor to the Attitude Era, that kind of 1997 period where they were heating up but still figuring a lot of these different characters and gimmicks out. And he's, Flash Funk, doing this sort of zoot suit pimp thing. Nah, you can keep it. I think I gotta go WCW. They were both pretty kind of brief sprints, I feel like.
Yeah.
But the WCW portion of that was, on balance, a lot better for me.
Yeah, see, I actually saw him as Flash Funk, first, and I kind of liked him. It was kind of intriguing. Hey, here's some guy who's got a different moveset than everybody else. Kind of like when Mark Merrow came in, too. I had no idea who he was, before he was the Wild Man. Here are these guys coming in, and I guess it's all that Jim Ross, right?
That's a good comparison, though, with Mark Merrow. I totally see that.
He signed all those guys in '96. I guess Austin was kind of '95-ish, but I mean, in '96 they had Austin, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Mankind, Farouk, Mark Merrow. All those guys came in. And I think that was all Jim Ross doing that, signing these guys and giving them these new personalities that were completely different than their role in the previous company, WCW. But now thinking about it, it's if they weren't going with the flashy Flash Funk, they could have just plugged him into the Nation as just another guy in there, giving him another worker.
Might as well have, really. So does that mean you are going WWF?
Well, no. I was actually going to go WCW.
Okay.
But there is some stuff in the WWF that I kind of liked. I liked when they did that Job Squad in '98. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Oh yeah. I often forget that he stuck around that long, but I do remember the Job Squad quite well.
was Al Snow and Scorpio. I think did they have Bob Holly in there? Maybe
Bob Holly was in there, and then they started feuding.
And then they kind of plugged in, I think, at least one show, maybe, like the Blue Meanie or something. And I think even Gilbert was with them.
Yep.
Scorpio was one of the guys holding the sparklers on a Raw, I think.
My God.
It is kind of funny that he had that kind of longevity. And I think they even did something that was crazy on one show. Like, I think they did something, too, with him where it was like he had given up the Flash Funk thing kind of quietly, and he was Scorpio. And I think he might have teamed up with, like, Farouk against Bradshaw and Terry Funk. And then I think they teamed up very briefly on a show. I don't think they ever tag teamed that long. But I think he teamed up with Terry Funk, too. Oh, because he was still calling himself Flash Funk, but he wore the Scorpio pants. I think It was kind of weird.
It was very weird because he had Terry Funk. So, okay, this guy's Flash Funk. We have a Terry Funk. Why don't we team them? Were they supposed to be related? What are we going for here?
Yeah, because I was kind of confused because I think they teamed them up very briefly, and then like the next week or something, yeah, they had that pay-per-view where it was like he was then teaming with Farouk, and they had Terry
they were
Funk.
both black.
Yeah, and then they had Terry Funk and Bradshaw, who were the Texans, so we'll team them up, and I think like Terry Funk's like, I'm actually retiring, and Bradshaw's like, what? We're tag team partners, and you're retiring, and he just clobbers him.
He beats his ass, that's right. Yes. Oh, my God. Well, what an interesting career of Too Cold Score. Well, okay, at the end of the day, we have to bring it back to his music video in WCW.
Oh, yeah.
What a treat. I know we've talked about it before, but can't say enough good things about that. So, all right, well, I guess we're back on the same page then. We're going WCW for him?
Yeah, he was the Hung and Bung. They were tag team champs. So.
Okay, all right. What do we have next?
The next one is another freaking tricky one, and you're probably going to kill me for this. And other people are probably going to be like, what the fuck? But it's Chris Jericho, and I went WCW on that one.
I can't say what the fuck because, God, he is a really tricky one. His 1998 WCW is, I mean, tremendous.
See, that's hard to beat. That's hard to beat, that whole run.
It is. Because it's some of the best character work of any wrestler, top to bottom, in any individual year. And it really can be confined to one specific calendar year because he becomes that character pretty much in early, like January, and carries it through until the end of his run, which I guess he stuck around at least on television for the first 3 months of 1999. So we can go ahead and count that as part of that heel character run. And then you look at when he debuts in the WWF, it's in not late, but summer of 1999, has a very strong debut, and then like a whole lot of nothing. Jericho's 1999 in general is bad, just really bad, because it's the end of his WCW career and the beginning of his WWF career, and both are just such rough patches.
Well, I do remember that one pay-per-view. I think it was actually like a replacement. So on the pay-per-view, they plugged in X-Pac. That was kind of a good match, but it was like a throwaway.
You're right. He was supposed to wrestle Ken Shamrock at that September pay-per-view, and then Shamrock split, never to be seen again, plugged in X-Pac, throwaway, just like you said. It's an okay match, but it was sort of one of those, was like, Jericho needs to learn how to work WWF style. So we're going to have him work with our best guy in ring, X-Pac, which sounds pretty absurd, but you have to think this is 1999 WWF. Closes out the year with the China feud. Didn't exactly set the world on fire. He finally settles into more of a decent character in 2000, being the babyface. And here's my issue, is he was such an obnoxious jerk-ass kind of guy, but was also still good at playing that underdog character because he was constantly getting his ass kicked in 2000.
Yeah.
So it worked, but at the same time, it worked in terms of making him sympathetic, but still wasn't someone I rooted for because he was such an idiot, annoying kind of douchebag character still.
See, I was so into Jericho like in 2000, and I was like, almost how can you not? He had the good matches with like Angle and Eddie, and then even like the Triple H match was good, I think, at the one pay-per-view. And he had the Raw thing where it was like the fluke title win, where I almost won the title and then had to give it back. So he did have some kind of like really highs in 2000. But yeah, like you're saying, like now going back and thinking about it, he's kind of annoying. Like his face work then doesn't age that well with his whole bottom feeding trash bag hoe. It's like either do I go with that work rate, and like I don't want to say work rate because it sounds so like, I don't know, snarky or something, because I don't really talk about work rate on here, but the enjoyable matches or that enjoyable character. And I think that character is still so like highly regarded. We've talked about it so much, kind of thing.
No, this is my conflict as well, where you have to compare it in terms of the matches versus the character. I think it's an easy decision for me to say that the comparison is easy. You have to go 1998 Chris Jericho versus 2000 Chris Jericho. Let's just throw out 1999.
Yeah.
It's pretty disposable.
You still had Ralphus, and it's Ralphus Day, so.
You did. You had Ralphus in 99, but I think Ralphus, didn't he start in late 98? So, again, nothing really stand out from 99, and you could count, and part of what makes it tricky is he's similar to Dustin Rhodes in that he has had a long and storied WWE career. It's just so much of it occurred after the acquisition of WCW, so we
got to throw out his team with Christian that I love.
Yes.
And then we got to throw out the feud with HBK, 03 and in 08, that everybody loves the 08 one. I like the 03 one. So you got to throw out all that. You got to throw out the list of Jericho.
Much different discussion, I think, and kind of a more interesting discussion to me. And end of the day, I think I'm going to go, I think I'm with you in leaning WCW.
Even before that,
yes,
even before that, he still had some good matches. He wasn't a character like at all.
It's just kind of like a bonus, right? So we haven't really talked about the prior to peak WCW Jericho, but the fact is, it does exist, and it's just sort of icing on the cake. You're right. I was going to say exactly the same.
All the days, Jericho.
All the days, Jericho. Thank you very much. So I don't find this a controversial pick. I am going to agree with you and go with WCW Jericho when you're making this type of comparison that we are. So, all right.
It seems like we're getting too WCW heavy, but I guess it is a WCW show. But I didn't stack it this way.
I know. This was not by design. I'm actually very surprised by this. I will be honest. When you look at, again, within the scope of our analysis. If we talked about Chris Jericho's entire career, of course, his entire WWE career, if that's fair game, is going to be better than everything he did in WCW. Why don't we do one more and then get out of here? I know we haven't done as many as we thought we might, but just in the interest of time and saving this for a rainy day, why don't we do one more?
Okay, the next one, it's another Andy guy, Bam Bam Bigelow.
Okay.
This was kind of hard, too, because, yeah, I liked him in the WWF, but now as I'm getting older, I'm like, they really misused him because he could have been more of a bruiser as he was in WCW. And I think on the last show or previous show, I was talking about how he went like toe-to-toe and went face-to-face with Goldberg, like right when he comes out. So he had a strong debut, and then he was in the Triad, and he had some kind of silly hardcore stuff later on.
Yep.
But I have to give it to WWF, though. Even though they didn't use him right, he had that main event with Lawrence Taylor. So at least they put him in the main event. So that's why I went with that way.
Yeah, I will go ahead and agree with you just because his peak in his entire career did occur in WWF, and it was, a WrestleMania main event, an extremely prominent role. And though they did misuse him significantly, I can't really look to WCW and point to any, here are some great kind of overlooked WCW matches.
Well, the one with Scott Hall, though.
I just thought of that, too. He had the ladder match with Scott Hall. That was good, but what else?
The Triad tag matches are fun.
I don't know how much participation he necessarily has in those. Like it was kind of Freebird rule where it's DDP and Canyon a lot of times, or maybe it's Bam Bam and Canyon, but
there was one on the DDP Blu-ray that I bought recently, which I bought through the Place to Be Nation Amazon link. So if you want to buy your next wrestling video purchases, take advantage of that too.
It is placetobenation.com/Amazon.
Nice.
So if you want to, cost you no additional dollars, but off of your purchases, Place to Be Nation benefits a little bit monetarily, so take us up on that.
I purchased the DDP Blu-ray recently. There's a match on there where I think it's supposed to be Saturn and Canyon against Bam Bam and like DDP, and like Canyon is nowhere to be found. It's just Saturn versus those two guys by himself. And it was a really good match. I think Canyon comes in like right at the end, gets popped in the face.
Yeah,
I think they take him out pretty quickly.
I do sort of vaguely recall that one. I mean, yeah, it's good storyline stuff and a decent enough match, but does it really measure up to his WWF stuff? Admittedly, I can't point to any other. He had the Brett matches, right? So that's worth mentioning and giving some credit to in WWF.
I had said Tatanka was a black hole of suck and just sucked everybody down, but there's one like 6-man tag thing at like SummerSlam 93. They had Tatanka and the Smoking Guns against Bam Bam and the Head Shrinkers, and like I never get to talk about this because we have a WCW show, but if anybody wants to watch a fun 6-man tag, and there's a cool spot where Bam Bam and the Head Shrinkers all go up for like a triple headbutt off the top ropes, and they're in like the three corners, and they're gonna go for like a triple headbutt splash thing, and they miss it, but it would have been awesome though.
I guess that's something.
Even the next SummerSlam, it had like a really shitty, like I think double DQ finish. But Bam Bam and IRS have a hot match against the Head Shrinkers. It was pretty quick, but they all had their working boots on.
Okay, yeah, no, you're right. So,
but it seems like Solo, I guess, they never really used him, like I said, as like a bruiser, because I think like now with adult eyes, like I'm watching these Bam Bam matches, and like I love Bam Bam, but he was maybe his own worst enemy or something. I don't know if that makes sense because...
No, it does. He's a bit of a schlub, right?
Oh, no, I was going to say, like, they almost stick him in the fat guy role of, like, Earthquake, and they stick him in this fat guy role, but, like, he's not. He's, like, really athletic, and when you watch the Bret Hart matches, he's, like, keeping up with him hold for hold, and they're doing, like, these, like, I don't know, a full arm dragon twist stuff, and they're doing that, and he's keeping up with Bret. But then he gets plugged into other guys, and they just kind of like use him in that fat guy role or something.
Yeah. I mean, what I mean is he looks like a bit of a schlub. He looks like the fat guy, even though he can go. And
he can do moonsaults. I mean, holy shit, and cartwheels.
Yeah, he can go at a higher level than most other guys, but they just sort of pigeonholed him into that sort of role. So, and that was something that you don't really want to count against him. It's not really his fault, but they could have used him to much better effect. And still, regardless of that, I think I still got to go with WWF. It was.
Yeah,
maybe a little too late. Although WCW made the college try, it wasn't really going to happen. He was rowing against the tide at that point.
It's like his best period was probably 98 in ECW. Watching some of that, or even 97, I think. He wrestled Spike Dudley, and he threw him in the crowd. So it's like they used him in that role. He is like the beast from the East, like the bruiser that's like just like murdering people. Then he didn't have the level of competition.
All right, well, we are in agreement then. WWF for Bam Bam Bigelow, and that brings them up, but I think they're still trailing WCW in our overall rankings. So, again, this was a little bit surprising to me, but I'm okay with it, given that we are a WCW podcast. Do you have a grand total for us?
7 WWF, I think, and 11 WCW, I think, and 2 draws.
Wow. That is more surprising to me than I thought we would come out of this with. And again, acknowledging that we've left some significant heavy hitters, if you will, out of this discussion, but I think we can come back to this on another day, perhaps somewhat soon. This has been a very fun, entertaining topic for me. I hope it has been for you as well, Mr. Savage.
Oh, man, yeah, it is. Like I said, I had to put my thinking caps on.
Me too.
Or thinking cap, not thinking caps. Like I don't have 2 heads.
Oh, you might have 2 thinking caps for just your 1 head. In any case,
I have one in the wash and one that I wear, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. Well, we are running desperately short on time. You can find me on the Place to Be Nation Pop feed, where I co-host the aforementioned Talkin' Pop with Jenny Smith. You can look for me on Twitter as well if you would like to hit me up, slide into my DMs. I am at Psych68 on Twitter. Andy, do you have anything to plug?
Well, I've kind of been tooling around on Instagram and created a Instagram for our show. Survey Says. It's survey_says. If I come across something funny that's WCW related, I'll post it, like whether it's a video or a picture. Just kind of like our show is. It's just wacky WCW.
Awesome. So we are now officially on Instagram. Thanks to you, Andy Helene. So check us out. Survey_says on Instagram. Some very cool stuff there. And I'm sure that will just grow over time. We have, what kind of programming do we have coming up next that the viewers can look forward to?
Next on TNT, a special episode of Monster Vision with Joe Bob Briggs. The movie tonight is The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, starring our favorite actor on Survey Says, Peter Weller, along with another favorite, Jeff Goldblum.
Oh my gosh! Well, that's a somewhat surprising pick for Joe Bob Briggs' Monster Vision, but kind of a favorite of mine in a sort of unexpected way. So look forward to that. At this point, our director Keith Mitchell is trying to wrap me up. Don't wrap me up! We've got to get out of here, folks. The tape machines are rolling. Check us out next month. We are Survey Says. For Andy Helene, I am Tim Capel. We gotta go!